And in a larger sense, they were building it for all of us who've sat in those bleachers, looked down upon whatever sporting event was occurring. And so we have an enormous debt of gratitude to those construction workers who built it so well. That it's still there for us to be watching, let's say, a sectional championship
100%.
Basketball game, last March.
Yeah, literally 99 years later.
Yeah.
That's wild. You heard that there. That is Pete DeKever, Mishawaka historian, wondering if the builders who constructed Mishawaka High School would ever think that 100 years later that those walls would still be holding strong, welcoming generations of Mishawakans. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. If you've driven past Mishawaka High School recently, you might have noticed giant yellow numbers, 100, lit up and attached to the side of the school. The 100 is there to mark the 100th birthday of Mishawaka High School. In September of 1924, Mishawaka High School at 1202 Lincoln Way East opened its doors to students for the first time. And since then, over 30,000 graduates have walked across that stage and obtained their diplomas. In this episode, I meet with the president and curator of the Mishawaka Historical Museum, Pete DeKever, and we talk 100 years of Mishawaka High School. From the selection of the top-notch architects to the cornerstone laying ceremony, to famous alum, to shenanigans in the cave, you'll definitely learn more about a Mishawaka institution that has been the heart and soul of the Mishawaka community for a century. Pete is a seasoned veteran of Round the Bend Now and Then, as this is his third time that he has appeared on the show. Go back and check out the episodes if you haven't heard them yet. Learn all about the Mishawaka Historical Museum or the amazing story behind the construction of the bleachers at Steele Stadium. As you'll hear, Pete is absolutely passionate about the city of Mishawaka and takes great pride in sharing its history. He's a retired educator of over 30 years, and he's published several books and dozens of articles on varied historical topics related to Mishawaka. Thank you, Pete, once again for coming on the show and teaching us about 100 years of Mishawaka High School. Before we dive into the interview, I highly encourage you to support our sponsors. Be sure to visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum, in Rugco's Studio and Gift Shop, and one of our new sponsors, Allie's Cafe and Catering. Before we jump into the episode, here's a quick word from Allie's Cafe. Folks, I am proud that one of my all-time favorite restaurants, Allie's Cafe and Catering, is a sponsor on this episode. We did an episode with Betty a while back, who owns Allie's along with her husband, Chuck. And as you heard in that episode, Allie's is about as locally owned and family operated as you can get. I'm proud to be spreading the good word about Allie's Cafe, as I have been a customer there for over 20 years. Our sons are 16 and 23, and both of them have been going to Allie's with us for as long as they can remember. And speaking of family, that is the feeling that you get as soon as you step in and interact with the staff and other guests. Waitresses there treat you like family, and that is why they have literally served generations of customers. Those who were once children eating their Mickey Mouse pancakes at Allie's over 20 years ago are now parents themselves and are bringing their own children to Allie's. To me, that is a true testament to the success of a local establishment. But being nice is great and all, but let me tell you about their food. Their menu is quite diverse, from breakfast items, including my absolute favorite, the breakfast burrito, and my wife's favorite, biscuits and gravy, to hamburgers, to sandwiches, to wraps and salads, to name a few. But they don't stop there. Since 1997, they've built quite the catering service also. Over those years, they've served countless events, weddings, funerals, parties, and so forth. And to me, simply saying since 1997 tells me they're doing something right. They're located at 2323 Mishawaka Avenue, about a block east of Ironwood. And to check out all that they have to offer, simply head to their website at alleyscafe.com. Folks, I can't encourage you enough to stop by Alley's and grab a meal. And if you see me in there stuffing my face with a giant breakfast burrito, don't laugh. Just let me enjoy the tasty goodness. Thank you again, Alley's, for sponsoring this episode. The current Mishawaka High School is turning 100 years old this year. And we're going to just talk for the next half hour, 45 minutes. And we want to celebrate the school. And being a school that's 100 years old, there are countless amounts of stories and situations that it's hard to sum it up in 45 minutes, obviously. But I really just want to talk about the past 100 years, get the essence, some highs, some lows, and go from there. So,
well, you found my favorite historical subject of all.
Love it.
Mishawaka High School.
That's awesome. So that's great. Let's talk about the schools that were around before the high school was built in 1924. Right. And it was mostly currently near where the building is still there on Lincoln Way, right?
Yes.
One of the buildings.
One of the buildings,
yep.
Yes. It's important to make a distinction between the building that is turning 100 years old here in September, and the institution that really is 155 years old this December. So the first Mishawaka High School, or its origins, I guess you could say, go back to December 13th, 1869. When a building opened, Victorian-looking 3-story building, at the southwest corner of Hill and First Streets.
Okay.
A few years later, that was more officially a high school, but they had high school students there from day one. And even in the very early 1870s, they had a high school principal. They reported the enrollment of the high school, but there were also elementary students in that building.
Okay.
So that became Mishawaka High School and was Mishawaka High School until they outgrew it. By 1910, the second Mishawaka High School building was constructed immediately to the south. That building still stands. It's Mishawaka Main Junior High Apartments. But that building was Mishawaka High School from 1910 until the spring of 1924, when, again, the city outgrew the building. But by that time, they'd already been planning for 3 years construction of a new, larger Mishawaka High School building that would address the immediate need and even the foreseeable need for future enrollment. And it's that building that opened for first day of learning, first day of classes, September 2nd, 1924.
100 years ago. And that main junior high, when it was the high school, that puppy filled up. It was too crowded within 10 years.
Right.
And they started planning within probably 1920-ish, and then to build the new high school. Speaking of the new high school, and when I say the new high school, it's the 1924 high school. It's that gorgeous, beautiful building on Lincoln Way that we know today. When they proposed the location at first, there was some people got up in arms a little bit, huh?
Yes, there was some backlash. The superintendent was P.C. Emmons, and it was his vision to leave the downtown area. There was no available parcel of land to build the kind of building that they know they needed, that they knew they needed. And the block where the old building was located, there was no place to expand.
Kind of landlocked houses and businesses around there.
Exactly. So P.C. Emmons kind of read the development of Mishawaka, the trends, where the new housing was.
Right.
And he says, well, let's go to this location at 1202 Lincoln Way East, a mile east of downtown.
Right.
And we'll get a spacious campus there.
Right.
We'll build a building that will be usable and a campus with a football field and everything for decades to come. And the criticism, at least by some in the community, was that it was a remote site. It was too far. I mean, it was on the edge of the world.
Right.
The edge of town.
Yeah.
But the reality is that already those streets were starting to fill up.
Yeah.
And there were no other parcels of land that they could have gotten any closer to the downtown to build this high school. So going a mile east allowed them to have the space they needed, but soon the city just engulfed that site. Homes were built on every parcel, every lot, within a third of a mile, and the city then just kept expanding even
east.
further east.
Yeah. And that it just gets me because now it is straight up neighborhood, straight up part of the city. And to me, it's almost more central. I mean, it's only a mile east of downtown, but then automobiles were just getting going and the streetcar line was up and down Lincoln Way. But other than that, that's just wild to me. It also, the Superintendent Emmons and the school board and the city, they had a vision to build a school of great quality, a school that would last. And so they chose some architects that were pretty renowned, huh?
Yes, they chose the architectural firm of Perkins, Fellows, and Hamilton.
Okay.
They were a Chicago firm. Their office was right across from the water tower there along Michigan Avenue. Okay. And they were the gold standard when it came to school architecture, especially here in the Midwest, but they had a national reputation. They've just built outstanding classic buildings, some of which are still around. Mishawaka High School's siblings you can find in different communities throughout the Midwest. And we were very, very fortunate to get that architectural firm to do our building.
Yeah.
And it also speaks highly of Superintendent Emmons and the school board that they spared no expense.
Right.
They got the best architects. They did everything that they were supposed to do to build a fantastic landmark building and not just another building to get them by for 20 years when all of them would no longer have been in office.
Right, exactly. 100 years it's lasted, and that's just amazing. Speaking of the opening of the school, it opened, kind of had a soft opening at first, but then there was a really cool cornerstone laying. So let's just talk about that.
So the first day of school was Tuesday, September 2nd, 1924. And the building at that point was not entirely complete. Basically, all the classrooms and laboratories were finished. The gymnasium was pretty much finished, although the floor had not been laid. It was to be laid by October 1st. There was no auditorium standing yet.
Yeah.
It had not been built. And likewise, there was no cafeteria. The auditorium and the cafeteria would not be built or finished until May of 1925. So that construction was ongoing throughout the year. And they decided not to have an official full dedication of the building there in the opening week or two of school. They were going to save that. And they ultimately did that dedication on May 5th, 1925.
Pretty
May
much
5th.
At the end of the school year-ish.
Right. And then, so what they decided to do instead was to have a cornerstone laying ceremony. And that took place on the afternoon of September 11th, 1924. And it was really an amazing event, a remarkable moment in Mishawaka history. There were students from the Mishawaka public and parochial schools who paraded from the old high school site to the new high school. And along with them were the Masons, the Mishawaka Rubber and Woolen Company band, other civic groups. Imagine them walking down Lincoln Way. And then they come to the front lawn of the high school. 1,500 people are there for this maybe half hour, 45-minute ceremony at the end of the school day. And the Masons are in charge of planning the ceremony. And they lift up the cornerstone, which would be placed at the southeast corner of what today is the auditorium. They lift it up 6 feet. It hangs there for a while. Then they go through the ceremony. And then they lower it into place. And they had a bunch of items, kind of a time capsule. Inside that cornerstone. And then the speaker for the event, the main speaker, was a man named William McAndrew. He was the superintendent of schools in Chicago.
Okay.
And he talks to them about the importance of the building that they've constructed.
Right.
And he's the one that uses the wonderful phrase of it being a civic cathedral.
Nice.
It was Mishawaka's civic cathedral, to which everyone had played a role in building, or at least paying for.
Right.
It's not like the old European cathedrals where everybody might have physically laid a stone in the building. Here he's saying everybody, either as a taxpayer or just somebody who frequented a business who then would have to pay taxes, helped pay for that school.
Yes.
The whole city were cathedral builders.
Kind of a shared ownership in one way or another.
Yes.
Yep. Man, that now the cornerstone is still there?
Still there. Yeah. And, for years, it was obscured by bushes that had grown up in front of it. I mean, I never knew there was a cornerstone there until about 5 years ago.
That's
when
crazy.
They cleared out all the landscaping and they redid the front courtyard. And sure enough, there it was. So it was there all those years I was a student there.
That is crazy.
All those times I'd walked past it going to basketball games. And so it's like it was uncovered. I'm sure other people knew about it, but I never even knew it was there.
Yeah, that's crazy though. I mean, but the little history buff in me, I'm always looking for different little cornerstones and stuff like that. And goodness, we chatted the other day. You mentioned some of the gentlemen who constructed the building and just not knowing or not knowing what they were building, like what the next 20, 30, 40 years would build. It's just kind of powerful.
And that certainly applies to the building as a whole. I mean, those men who were pouring concrete and putting structural steel and laying brick and mortar, they knew in a general sense, okay, we're building a school.
Right.
Kids are going to have English class and math class, et cetera, here. And in the auditorium, they knew that there would be dramatic performances. And in the gymnasium, they knew it'd be PE classes and boys basketball. Because
we didn't know anything else yet.
That's all there was in terms of indoor sports that Mishawaka participated in. But what I've been reflecting on is who they actually were building it for. And we know the details. We know that 30,000 people have gone through that school and become alumni. We know that Adam Driver used that auditorium, to begin to learn how to do dramatic performances. And in the gymnasium, again, those construction workers didn't know whom they were building it for, but we know that they were building it for Leroy Johnson, the great basketball player of the 1950s. They were building it for Sharon Versa, Miss Basketball in 1984. They were building it for those great Mishawaka volleyball teams of the 1980s and 1990s.
So neat.
They were building it for those individuals. And in a larger sense, they were building it for all of us who've sat in those bleachers, looked down upon whatever sporting event was occurring. And so we have an enormous debt of gratitude to those construction workers who built it so well.
Correct.
That it's still there for us to be watching, let's say, a sectional championship
100%.
Basketball game, last March.
Yeah, literally 99 years later.
Yeah.
That's wild. We stop here for a quick word from one of our sponsors. You've heard me talk about In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop multiple times on the podcast and on social media. I am very proud to partner with them, and I encourage you all to stop by and check out all that they have to offer. In Rugco Studio and Gift Shop is located in a cool, old, historic Mishawaka storefront located at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue, right across from the entrance to Central Park. At this family-owned gift shop, you'll find Mishawaka and South Bend-inspired teas, coffee mugs, stickers, and magnets that you just will not find anywhere else. But this is more than just a hometown pride store. You'll also find national brands like Lodge Cast Iron, Minnetonka, Darn Tough Socks, and Smart Wool. There are gourmet food options, outdoor clothing and footwear for men and women, and seasonal decor. There's even a small batch bakery located inside, Lola's Pastry, Bread, and Jam Bakery. This is a true Mishawaka destination. To truly get a sense of all that In Rug Co. Studio and Gift Shop has to offer, you just have to visit their store. Again, at 220 East Mishawaka Avenue, across from the Central Park entrance. Once you're there, you'll understand why I'm describing the place so enthusiastically and why I'm so excited that we are partnering, as they are a locally owned small family business who is entrenched in our community and dedicated to seeing it thrive. Our website, indianarugco.com, to check out all that they have to offer. The link is in the show notes. And now, back to the episode. All right, well, we just talked about the gym, and in later years, I learned from you the other day, in the early 90s, it was nicknamed The Cave. It's had many memorable events over the years, and we just talked about the gentleman who constructed it, who knew that they were building it for these memorable events. If you had to pick one or two of your most notable or memorable events over the years, what would they be in The Cave?
In terms of events that I personally have been present for, I would have to go back to the sectional championship basketball game this past March.
Okay.
Mishawaka was an underdog to Riley, but hung close throughout the game. And the game was ultimately decided on 3 free throws that Brady Fisher had to make with about 2 seconds left in regulation. And Mishawaka was not a particularly good free throw shooting team. And so, I mean,
pressure,
here's our whole season
on a kid
coming down to 3 free throws. And Brady sinks all 3 of them. It goes into overtime, and Mishawaka wins the sectional championship in overtime. And sitting next to me is Leroy Johnson,
Mishawaka's
greatest male athlete of all of Mishawaka High School's history. He had come back to town to watch the first sectional game on Tuesday.
Okay.
But he got so excited that he changed his travel
caught
plans.
Hoosier hysteria.
He stays for the Friday game. He stays for the Saturday game.
Oh, cool.
And he's sitting next to my 3 nieces, ages 6, 11, and 12. And one of Leroy's teammates from the class of 57. And we're all up there watching as those events unfold.
That is so neat.
And, you know, that was the last game of the 100th season of basketball in the Cave. And what a way for it to end. You couldn't have scripted it any better.
No.
And I couldn't help but think as Brady was shooting those free throws, that trying to invoke the intercession of these great deceased cavemen like Marvin Wood and John Longfellow and Cy Himshoot and a bunch of others, steer that ball through the rim 3 times.
That's just amazing.
And they did.
That's so cool. Well, and this was obviously well before your time, but there was a little run-in with a successful Mishawaka basketball coach and another basketball coach who was decently successful, John Wooden. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's
at the Cave.
That's probably the most famous incident to occur within the Cave. And I often think about that when I sit up in the upper level of the gym. That's somewhere around the middle part of the middle part of the north end of the gym. There was this incident that occurred on January 29th, 1937.
Okay.
Shelby Shake was Mishawaka's coach, very successful. And as it turns out, he is the most successful basketball coach at Mishawaka High School. He would go on ultimately to win 5 sectional championships, 1 regional championship, and take us to the state finals. He'd already won those 4 and the regional by 1937. Yep. And after the second game where that Mishawaka had played South Bend Central, coached by Johnny Wooden, Mishawaka had lost. They lost that game on January 29th. They lost an earlier game. And Shelby had just kind of had it. He sort of lost it for a moment after the game. And he was this kind of fiery temper, extremely competitive.
Spitfire guy,
And he did not like Johnny Wooden. Johnny Wooden was the golden boy of Indiana high school basketball. And also, as it turns out, Shelby Shake's second cousin from Martin County. And after the game, Shake comes up to Wooden and says something to the effect of, "How much did you pay those officials?" And Wooden did not appreciate that. And there are different accounts of what happened, but wooden may have started coming at Shake. There may have been some profanity from Shake.
Right.
And ultimately, the crowd milling around at the end of the game has to separate them.
Right.
And it seemed to have been forgotten after in the weeks that followed.
Yeah.
Shake made his apologies to everybody. And then Mishawaka goes on to win the sectional championship.
Yeah.
Shake's fifth. And then sometime in the spring, maybe April, the IHSAA steps in, reviews the incident, and tells Mishawaka High School that either you fire Shelby Shake or you will no longer be allowed to schedule IHSAA opponents in any sport.
That's wild.
So Shelby falls on his sword, says, okay, I understand. And he never coaches another high school basketball game the rest of his life.
That's insane. That's crazy. First of all, because nowadays it'd be recorded.
Yeah.
It'd be instant all over the place, instant social media, two coaches going at it. But it happens. Heat of the moment, it happens. And they didn't play. They said, you're...
Right. And it was words, not blows.
Of course, words. And it's also word of mouth in what happened as well.
It was a gross over-response to what happened.
Yeah.
And the people in Mishawaka, they blamed people from South Bend for going to the IHSAA.
I'm sure.
Because they wanted to get rid of Shelby Shake. He'd cost them 5 sectional championships.
That is shady business. Yeah. But that type of stuff still.
So that event occurred within that space. The man who would ultimately become the greatest coach in NCAA basketball history and Mishawaka High School's greatest coach having a moment there.
That's just amazing.
On the floor of the cave.
That's just amazing, man. It truly is. The high school has had renovations over the years.
Yes.
Let's just talk about some of them.
Sure.
And it kept, just like the 1910 building that ended up being Main Junior High, boom, blew up. They had to build a new one. The Mishawaka High School ended up having to expand as well.
And fortunately, they had the land to be able to do those additions. They were not landlocked, or they were able to acquire property, essentially. Right. And so that's what has kept the building viable. The original building, they would have outgrown that, too. So the first change to the building came in 1931 when the gold letters saying Mishawaka High School were put on the front of the building below the clock tower.
Yeah.
But in terms of structural modifications to the building and additions, there's no change until 1958.
Okay.
And the big change there was the expansion of the gym. The original gym that seemed so spacious in 1924, spacious enough for them to host the sectional all the way through 1939, they had outgrown it.
Yeah.
That gym could seat 1,400, maybe total capacity, something like 2,000. But by the early 1950s,
30 years.
mid-50s, it was seen as this outdated cracker box that everybody hated to play in. So the school board, they looked at their options. They thought about building a separate standalone facility elsewhere, and they ultimately decided to do probably the least expensive thing, and that is to extend the gym to the south all the way to the sidewalk along Lincoln Way.
Yeah.
And that increased the seating capacity to 4,071, and it helped Mishawaka get the sectional back. So that first game was played in November of 1958.
Okay.
And essentially what they did was make a mirror image of the north half of the gym on the south half, and then knocked out the big brick wall that had these tall windows that had previously been the south end of the gym. And that also allowed them to redirect the court to a north-south orientation instead of the east-west, which the east-west length of the gym was not really
I was going to say, probably not regulation anyways, right.
And so it's really the expanded gym, the expanded cave, it was an engineering marvel. It involved this huge steel beam that carried the weight of the roof, and just the whole prospect of expanding a gym. Who does that? You never see anybody saying, well, we're going to make our gym bigger by doubling it and then just knock out the wall. But that's what they did at Mishawaka High School.
Nice.
And that has allowed the cave to continue to be used. And that's why today it is the oldest active high school gym in the state of Indiana, in continuous use since 1924, December 27th, 1924.
Wow. That's something.
Yeah.
That's the oldest continuous. Wow. That's something else. And it's going to continue to be.
Right.
I mean,
for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, literally, it's going to continue to be.
So after the gym was expanded in 1958, 6 years later, there was another addition, this time a classroom addition that was added to the east side of the school along Gernhardt. And so essentially that was to accommodate the growing enrollment from the baby boomers.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, because by 1963, when construction started, the baby boomers were high school age, some of them.
Some of them were.
And so that was an addition that was put on.
Yeah.
And then in 1983, my era, on the west side of the building, they put on a classroom addition. It also included music rooms, a study hall, commons area. And then 4 years later, they constructed a pool and an auxiliary gym further west. So Mishawaka High School has been moving west in the 1980s. And the final addition to the building was in 1999. That was the construction of a new science and technology wing. So where the old industrial arts part of the building had been from 1924, that was actually demolished. It was a single-story part of the building, and they demolished that and then rebuilt a two-story addition with technology and science classrooms. And really, that has completed the building.
Yeah.
There haven't been any other parts of the building added. There's been work done on the
exterior
campus and parking
area.
lots and aesthetics. And in terms of interior renovations, remodeling offices or rooms, that'll go on forever.
Of course.
And that was going on even before 1958.
Right.
And so, there's been those kinds of changes, but essentially the exterior of the building and any major additions for the foreseeable future have been completed.
Yeah. And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. I want to thank the Mishawaka Historical Museum for helping to support our content. And folks, I couldn't be more happier to help support them and to speak the good word about the museum. The Mishawaka Historical Museum is located at 121 South Main Street in Mishawaka, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. I highly recommend that our listeners visit, and I promise that you'll learn something new about our area's history. When you first walk in, you'll be impressed with how bright and clean the museum is. Then you'll realize that the burger and fries you just ate cost more than the entrance fee to the museum. Heck, the fries alone probably cost more than the entrance fee at this point. For $5, you'll experience what is, hands down, the most comprehensive collection of artifacts and historical background, all specific to Mishawaka. You will learn tons from the artifacts and corresponding information. You'll learn how important early industry was to Mishawaka, Cam and Schellinger Brewery, Ball Band, and Dodge Manufacturing, to name a few. You'll find out about famous Mishawakans, including professional baseball player Freddie Fitzsimmons, or Coach Marvin Wood, the coach depicted in the movie Hoosiers, who coached at Mishawaka High School as well. Speaking of Mishawaka schools, there's a whole section dedicated to the history of schooling in Mishawaka, including some real neat old uniforms, banners, and photographs. Speaking of photographs, the museum contains one-of-a-kind pictures depicting a variety of Mishawaka subjects, each with a caption explaining more about it. In the military heritage section, you'll learn about Mishawaka's role over the years in helping to keep our country free. In the historic landmarks section, you'll see some amazing pictures and artifacts from historical Mishawaka landmarks, some still standing and some that were sadly lost to time. There's a whole section dedicated to the importance of churches and religion to the city. And if you ever have any questions about any of the artifacts or information the museum contains, Pete DeKever, the president and curator of the museum, is an absolute treasure trove of knowledge about Mishawaka, and he is right there to answer any questions you have or to provide more background to any of the museum's artifacts. Again, folks, I highly encourage that you visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum. You don't need to plan an all-day visit. 1 or 2 hours is all you need to experience everything that I mentioned above and more. Again, bring your $5 entrance fee, $3 for children 6 to 18, or free for 5 and younger, and experience the local gem of a place at 121 South Main Street, just south of the Lincoln Way and Main Street intersection. When you stop in, tell them that you heard about the museum on our podcast. Again, I'm very excited to be spreading the good word and encouraging you all to visit. To learn more, visit their website at www.mishawakamuseum.org. And now, back to our episode. When our listeners go visit the Mishawaka Museum exhibit, they'll see a couple different exhibits there. One, notable alumni. Let's just talk here a little bit about some notable alumni over the years.
Sure. We mentioned Adam Driver. He's the most famous graduate of Mishawaka High School simply because of the reach of Star Wars and modern movies. He was class of 2001. But we also have Conti Candoli. Conti was class of 1945, and he is in the International Jazz Hall of Fame. He was a jazz trumpeter, and he's one of the probably 7 or 10 greatest jazz trumpeters of all time.
Wow.
And he graduated from Mishawaka High School. Ramo Belli is another significant Mishawaka graduate. And I would, in fact, consider him to be the most significant graduate of Mishawaka High School.
Because of what he invented, right?
Right. Ramo was class of 1945, so he was a classmate of Conti Candoli.
Okay.
They were buddies growing up there in the Italian neighborhood on the south side. And Ramo was a drummer, professional drummer, 1940s, early 50s. And then he opened a music store in California, in the Los Angeles area. And then a few years later, a manufacturer of Mylar approached Ramo Belli and said, "We think you could use this to make synthetic drum heads."
Okay, so not real leather, like just so they can more mass produce
exactly
the drums.
to replace calfskin drum heads, which wore out and were susceptible to humidity. And so Ramo immediately latches onto the idea, starts a company that today is known as Ramo Inc. And that is the world's largest and drumhead manufacturer.
To this day?
To this day.
Wow.
Ramo passed away in 2016, but the company that he had built was already the world leader in manufacturing those musical instruments, and it set the standard for all drum manufacturers.
That's wild.
So, he profoundly affected modern music.
Yes.
And in that sense, that's why I consider him to be the most impactful or significant of those 30,000 graduates. Some other important names, Sharon Versip, who was Miss Basketball, also a tremendous volleyball player, class of 1984. She went on to be a college coach, and she coached at Purdue for many years, and now is coaching in South Carolina. But certainly one of the great luminaries of Mishawaka High School sports, and somebody who continues to be famous and well-known that people in Mishawaka can identify with. Another person I often think of in terms of famous Mishawakans, a woman named Irene Vergowen. She was class of 39 from Mishawaka High School, and she became an actress in Hollywood. And she played the role of the first Louise Tate on Bewitched. 13 episodes, the black and white seasons. But people, everybody's seen Bewitched.
Of course,
And so when we remind them of Irene Vergowen, they instantly recognize, that role that she played.
Yeah. That's cool. Also, listeners, when you visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum, you've already heard about it on social media posts. We've had an episode about it. You'll see that there is also an exhibit about the 100 years of Mishawaka Museum, of the Mishawaka High School. Talk to us about that exhibit.
Sure. We have a permanent exhibit as part of our school's exhibit with a lot of Mishawaka High School artifacts. But what we've done here to help celebrate the 100th anniversary of the building is to take our rotating exhibit platform and devote it entirely to more Mishawaka High School items. So I think currently we have over 100 Mishawaka High School artifacts on display.
So neat.
And some really interesting and significant artifacts from the history of the school. And then when you think about the Mishawaka High School alumni that we have represented in our famous Mishawakans exhibit, there's another 40 artifacts or photographs. So, we're very proud of Mishawaka High School and its impact on the community.
Absolutely.
And the museum reflects that.
Yes, it does, for sure. Definitely. Speaking of the 100th birthday, we have a few events coming up, right?
Yes.
Early October. What's going on then?
Well, on October 8th, I'm giving a program at the American Heritage Spotlight at the Mishawaka Penn Harris Public Library at the downtown branch. So October 8th at 6:30 p.m.
Okay.
And it's hour and 20-minute program about stories from the history of Mishawaka High School. So some of the topics that we're talking about today in the podcast, but others,
of course,
as well. And we want a sea of maroon filling
That's
that
awesome.
room.
October 8th at 6:30 at the Mishawaka Public Library right downtown.
Downtown, down in the Spencer Gallery.
Tickets ahead of time or just show up?
Nope, it's free. There's no registration required, no cost. Just come on down and
wear maroon, though.
Yes,
you said.
please.
Exactly. That's great. And also January 4th, basketball?
Yes. A basketball game, you might say a century in the making. It's Mishawaka High School will be playing Northview High School. Northview is located in Brazil, Indiana, so southern Indiana.
Okay.
And the significance of Brazil is that was the first opponent that Mishawaka played in the gym, in the cave, December 27th, 1924. And so the athletic department at the high school, they decided to do a Centennial game to celebrate the cave. And Brazil High School is no longer in business. They've consolidated into something called Northview, which is located in Brazil. And so Northview will be coming up, playing Mishawaka. Both teams will be wearing retro uniforms.
That's cool.
We know that the kids from Brazil, or from Northview, they're going to be wearing Brazil on their uniform. So it's like they're resurrecting their long-lost school and coming up here to play Mishawaka. And I think there's going to be some other kind of celebrity events and celebratory events. It's a game that may very well sell out the cave. People have been telling me that they're coming. I know there's somebody coming from San Diego just to see that game.
That's neat.
Leroy Johnson's coming from Maryland. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this game because it's seen as a way to celebrate the cave.
Yes, exactly. Not just the cave, but all of the high school, and just it and especially being a one high school town, the citizens community rallies around their athletic events a lot more.
Yeah.
And so the athletic events mean more than just a bouncing ball on a wooden court. It means a lot more than that. It just means 100 years of in the community.
And I think, this is true with Mishawaka High School sports, whether it's football teams or basketball teams or other sports. When we see those kids run out onto the court or on the field, we may not know any of the individuals on the team, may not have any family connection to them, but they are our kids in the sense that they come from Mishawaka. And they've got the magic word, Mishawaka or cavemen, on their jersey. And at that point, it becomes tribal.
Yeah, I get okay.
It's our tribe against your tribe, our city against their city. And that is part of the appeal.
Yes.
And so be it. That's the nature of high school sports everywhere, but maybe a little bit more in Mishawaka.
Yeah.
There's certainly a strong sense of tribe in Mishawaka.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. I love it. I love athletics. I love the togetherness, the belonging that it all brings. I love it, And this has been great. and our listeners will absolutely just learn more about Mishawaka High School and the 100 years to celebrate it. Not many other school buildings around that we can sit and just say it's 100 years, When we chatted last week, when you talked about Mishawaka High School being the most impactful building in Mishawaka's history, that hit me. Let's talk about that.
Sure. And, I would go back to 1924. When that building was built, it was the largest building in the city.
Which is nuts in itself too. Yeah.
Right, because ball band, was a bunch of different smaller buildings. It collectively, it would be bigger than Mishawaka High School. Dodge Manufacturing, several different buildings. But Mishawaka High School, when it was built, was a massive structure as far as people saw it at the time. And, for the past 100 years, it has had a profound impact on everybody who has been a student there. It shaped their skills, their attitudes, their preparedness for life, their ability to make a contribution in their communities and their families. And so Mishawaka High School graduates, they have certainly shaped Mishawaka as business leaders and politicians and just educated voters. And they have done that in the communities that people have moved away and called their home. And in a larger sense, they have impacted the world through products like Ray Mobelli and his artificial or synthetic drum heads and these other significant graduates. And in that sense, the Mishawaka High School building has produced a product that is more significant, these impacted lives, than anything that ever came off the ball band shoe line or the Dodge Manufacturing assembly line for power transmission equipment or anything that came off the line at Wheelabrator. And that is something that should help us to be even more appreciative of Mishawaka High School is the profound impact that the graduates have had. And certainly that has been shaped and enabled by the building where that instruction, those experiences occurred.
Absolutely. That is so much more powerful. I mean, we think of products and everything in our cities in Mishawaka with ball band and stuff, but the Mishawaka High School absolutely over the years has produced all of that. Are we ready for another 100 years? Do we have it in us?
I hope so.
Does the building have it in it?
I think so. Yeah, it's very well maintained.
Yeah.
And, I know there's a lot of money that they spend to keep it up.
Yeah.
And to put on the additions. And when you walk around the outside of it, it looks better now than it ever did. I don't think when it opened in 1924, it looked as good as it does now.
Yeah.
On the inside of the building, it's not quite as elaborate or impressive, although the auditorium space certainly is. It's a little more ordinary on the inside, but still well-maintained, in good condition. And so if it is, if it continues to be maintained, if there's still that will on the part of the community and the school board and superintendents for generations to come, there's no reason why that building shouldn't be able to stand for centuries, just like some of Mishawaka's great churches, like St. Joseph Church and St. Monica's and First United Methodist Church. If those buildings are maintained, if the will is there to keep them and use them, they will last for hundreds of years. And in that sense, it's like the great buildings of Europe, these cathedrals and other structures,
the civic cathedral,
that have lasted for centuries. We can do that here with the most beloved and important building in the city.
Thank you once again for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. An extra special thanks to Pete DeKever for helping to educate us about an area institution, the 100-year-old Mishawaka High School. Be sure to visit the Mishawaka Historical Museum and learn so much more about the school and the city. Again, thank you to Allie's Cafe, In Rug Co. Studio and Gift Shop, and the Mishawaka Historical Museum for sponsoring this episode. Folks, please be sure to support them. If you like this episode, please be sure to share with anyone that you think would appreciate it. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's now and then.